Well, good morning to everyone connected online or on site right now in Belize. This is Mike Mora with the Department for Effective Public Management of the Organization of American States. Welcome to the second webinar for the ecosystem of open government in Belize. This is part of the Belize Open Government Webinars program that we had put together in the framework of the project Transformation to an Open Public Administration in Belize. This project is implemented by the Trust for the Americas and the Department for Effective Public Management of the OAS with the support of the Embassy of the United States of America. Today, we're going to be specifically talking about development of national open government action plans. This session is intended to provide an in-depth overview of the standards and practices when developing open government national action plans. We're going to talk about what are these action plans, what's in them, how to get there with those action plans. So we're going to be covering all that. The speakers will dive into the processes that enable co-creation of action plans. Also looking at the specific case of Uruguay, who we welcome here to this session, to this webinar, where government and civil society have incrementally progressed in the embracing of open government. So we're going to hear about that experience in Uruguay, how they have developed their action plans, what has been the background, and where are they today. So that's part of what we're going to be discussing today. One of the things I want to highlight to begin with is I want to apologize. You see on the screen right now, these are our speakers for the day. I'm going to apologize because Pepe Garcia from OGP has not been able to exit a meeting he's in right now to join this session. Perhaps we're going to hear from him at some point to greet us. So he is not going to be here present, but the good news about it is that I'm going to cover part of what he was intended to deliver today and tell us about the scope of creating open government national action plans with the view of the open government partnership. Other than that, we're going to have these two great speakers also from Uruguay, and this is very important to highlight. You see on the screen Virginia Pardo. Virginia Pardo is the Director of Digital Citizenship of E-Government and Information and Knowledge Society. Is the Director of the Digital Citizenship of the E-Government and Information and Knowledge Society National Agency that is known for its acronym in Spanish as AGESIC. AGESIC is the leading national government institution in charge of e-government, digital government, and also open government within it. So she will be representing the view of open government of the government of Uruguay, whereas you also see on the screen that we have Mr. Daniel Carranza joining us today in this webinar, actually together with Virginia Pardo in Montevideo. He's the co-founder of Data UI and representative to the Open Government Network of Uruguay, and he will represent the civil society of Uruguay in this webinar. So we're going to have, in a very crafty way, the two views of Uruguay as a country in embracing open government and the co-creation of action plans. So having said that, I want to begin by giving some instructions. Again, thanking all those ones who are joining online and are also joining offline on site in Belize right now. I want to thank also our project team in Belize, Ms. Audrey Robin, who's there with the participants on the on-site venue, as well as Ms. Melanie Barnes, who also complement this team for this project in Belize. So the instructions are as follows. First, we're going to have a Q&A, questions and answers session at the end of the presentations. Feel free to send your questions to any of us, the speakers, using the chat tool that you'll find on the bottom right of the screen. Do leave your question there at any point, at any time during the presentations. Do not wait until the end is our advice, but you feel free also to do more questions at the end. So as the questions arise, leave your question in the chat. The speakers will be able to look at them, prepare, and have an answer ready to address at the end of the presentations. That's very important. The other thing is this session is being recorded, so we're recording it for the purpose of giving it back to you so you can study this in more detail. Do follow the chat as not just for the questions, but because we're gonna most likely be posting links to documents, sites in the chat, and there will be a resource to you as well to get to know more about open government. So be vigilant of that chat and let's interact through it. We're also going to be sharing the presentations, so make sure that we're going to be sharing all this documentation as well. So I will continue. Now I apologize for listening to me a little longer than expected. I'm going to give this first introduction to what is development of national open government action plans. And after that, we're going to have the experience of Uruguay telling us about how this looks like. So the first thing I want to say is that the OGP has two instruments that is part of what I'm going to be sharing with you today here. One of them is the OGP handbook, and another one is the OGP Cocreation of Action Plans Toolkit. Two instruments that will give us a lot of insight about how to go about this process of implementing open government, implementing in a co-creation fashion, and third, that will give us specific instructions about how to go about developing a national action plan. So this is important, as in Belize right now. This project is in the process of supporting two things. The first thing that we're supporting, and we're very happy to do so, is the creation, the recent creation of a national open government Belizean steering committee. We're going to have more news to give to all the ecosystem of open government soon about that steering committee. But that steering committee is going to be the coordinating body composed of government and non-government actors to pursue open government in Belize. So we're happy to support that process right now with the project, and we're having specific sessions with this committee to make sure that we can give them also the tools they need to continue carry on that role. So that's one important part of it. The other important part of it is that the project will be facilitating the implementation or the development of the very first National Action Plan of Open Government of Belize. I want to highlight something for everybody connected here and from the participants online. These two initiatives in Belize are being implemented out of what is a formal open government partnership structure. Nevertheless, we have the opportunity to have a platform such as OGP joining us for this project, and also countries and experiences who have already formally or are in the process of formally implementing open government through the OGP platform. And we want to take advantage of that knowledge to make sure that we continue pursuing open government according to standards, rules, guidelines that are set for this. Meaning we don't have to reinvent the wheel to implement open government. There are rules, guidance, and standards, and that's what we want to pursue with the implementation of this project as well, to make sure that we align as much as possible with this process. So the first one of creating a national steering committee on open government. It is very aligned to what OGP does in the embracing of open government. We're going to hear about how that looks in Uruguay. As a matter of fact, we have two participants of that process from the government and from civil society on this webinar. And that is one step. The other one is actually do something and make sure that we create a plan to implement open government and create some commitments to implement and use open government as a platform. So we're going to be focusing on that. This is going to be my presentation. That's the introduction to make sure that we are well situated in why we're doing this and what are we taking as a reference to pursuing this. So the very first thing I want to highlight, it's the chapter 3 of this handbook of open government partnership, which talks about participation and co-creation tools. So there are tools already in place that will help us understand and will help us through the process of co-creating in Belize. Now, we're going to be focusing on co-creating an action plan, an open government action plan for Belize, but that doesn't mean that the co-creation can only be utilized for co-creating open government action plans. Co-creation, co-design is actually a methodology that is very encouraged today in public administration, not only for this kind of open government action plans, but actually for policies, national policies, local government policies, national strategies, or any other instrument that needs to be created, and by engaging a multi-actor forum could benefit greatly for doing so. So that's what we're talking about, co-creation. So there are tools already, and that's good to say. And there are standards for participation and co-creation, and you can see that here on the screen. And it's just basically to set out requirements for engaging civil society, citizens, and other stakeholders through the open government partnership processes, including 3 things, very important. Dissemination of information, which is basically to make sure that everybody knows and understands what's happening, but not only so, to make sure that actually that by doing so, by disseminating information, people can engage in different processes. So this is done to other relevant stakeholders, I'm sorry, in a timely manner, to inform what is the open government partnership processes. So we're doing these training sessions as part of this. Make sure that everybody understands what's co-creating and how we can go about it once we start this process of co-creating action plans next month in Belize. So stay connected to the project, stay connected to our project team in Belize, because you will receive invitations to participate in person in the different sessions that we're going to have to co-create starting next month in March in Belize. I'll be there with you also to do that. The second aspect of this co-creation standards and participation is spaces and platforms for dialogue and co-creation. So this is very important to facilitate inclusive and ongoing dialogue within a variety of spaces and platforms appropriated to open government context. So that's what we're going to do next. That's what we're going to enable next month and starting there up to the end of the year to make sure that there are spaces for dialogue and co-creation. So we're doing first disseminating information, very important, so everybody is in the know about about what's going on. As a matter of fact, I'm also going to promote our Facebook page and hashtags. You can do at OpenGovBelize or hashtag OpenGovBelize, and you'll find the project, and you'll find the open government initiatives in Belize through those hashtags or handles. Connect and get more information about the project and everything else. It's also a space to exchange, so make sure you use it. The third is co-ownership and joint decision making, and that's very important because we're in the process of co-creating a national action plan, and that's not just for you to participate in dialogues, discussions, give your input, but also to make sure that the entire co-creation process ends with empowering you to decide what's going to be finally on certain document. In this particular case, the actual national action plan, but it could be a policy or so if co-creation is implemented in other settings. So co-ownership and joint decision making is very important as part of this co-creation process. Government, civil society, and other stakeholders should jointly own and develop the process. So that's very important, and we're going to exercise that starting next month. So this is a summary of what it is. And for that, also OGP has this OGP Participation and Co-Creation Toolkit that is more of the hand book This will give us more detail about how to go and get detail on the different characteristics and so on and so forth. I'm taking some time here because I want to make sure that I'll give you both of the links to make sure that you explore both the handbook and the co-creation toolkit. Let me see if I have it. Yes, you have them there in the chat. Make sure that you navigate and you get you know them well. Those are going to be very good instruments for us throughout the year. Then, so I'm going to just go quick into this action plan. So this is what the handbook tells us about the action plan development. So chapter 4 and item 4.1 tells about action plans, and it tells us that they are the core of the country's participation in OGP. In this particular case, because there's an entire process where countries co-create that action plan and actually submit these plans to the OGP, to the Open Government Platform, after a review process, and they're all approved, and they're sent to OGP as a steward of those action plans, but also to make sure that there is a process of follow-up, right? It's not only to create commitments and be aspirational about those commitments. It's actually about creating commitments that we can fulfill. And that's going to be very important. Uruguay probably is going to tell us a bit about the story. In another sessions, we hear about, yes, be ambitious, but also be realistic, right? And so that's important. We have to measure well how many, what level of commitments we're going to create, we're going to make, what are we going to agree on, because again, it's not an inspirational document, it's a concrete document to fulfill. So these action plans are the product of the co-creation processes in which government and civil society develop ambition commitments to foster transparency, accountability, and public participation. That's very important. It's how this is presented, but it could be more than that, takes beyond the transparency, accountability, and public participation. So go through, visit these highlights. There are a few things that they tell us to consider, and that's very important. I want to highlight them all and then move on to the Uruguayan presentation. And that has to do with, one, action plans must be submitted to the OGP support unit in both the administrative language of the country and English. So they need to be submitted. We're starting a process of the Open Government Partnership. They're going to be participating and supporting this. We're not certain yet when Belize is going to take the step as a country to join. But at some point, we're exercising the process of developing action plans. And at some point, if it joins, then this is part of the process that has to be fulfilled. The second part of it is that the official version of the action plan has to be published on the OGP website. Again, it's not only as an aspirational document, it's a public document as well for people to see, study, and to make sure that that helps also with the check and balances. That's very important as well. Now, here is some of the characteristics of that process of what they call successful OGP action plans. And they say that focus on significant and open government priorities and ambitious reforms. So that's very important. You might think from the Belize perspective that there are a lot of priorities, and perhaps so. You're not alone, as that will be for every country. Every country's got tons of priorities and needs of reform. But as being as realistic as possible, the action plan want to make sure that agrees on a number of actually doable items. The other parties that are relevant to the OGP values and transparency, accountability, and public participation. And I think a lot of the priorities in Belize could fit into that, definitely so. And contain specific time-bound and measurable commitments. Again, not just aspirational, but things that can be done and can be actually delivered and measured. That's very important. So, within the characteristics, we have these ones listed here. Ambitious goals, meaning that they have to test the limit of what can be done, and that's very important. I think it's one of the characteristics that actually pushes for innovation and for change as well. That challenges status quo of different things, so that's important. The other one is that are relevant. No, participating government should ensure that each commitment included in the action plan is clearly advancing one or more of the following open government values: transparency, accountability, public participation. We mentioned it already, and that's something very important, right? So it has to be relevant. Each and every one of us as a citizen or as a civil society organization or as a government office have priorities. We often think that our point is the relevant point. Well, the co-creation process kind of challenges that to make us think about what is relevant for society and for the country as a whole, right? So the final commitment and agreement should be in what it's really relevant, and that's sort of the part of the discussions that should start taking place as soon as the process of creating an action plan starts. Then the four of those open government values, it's technology and innovation. That's important, right? Because technology is an enabler, and innovation also creates a very important part of what we're doing right now. Governments embrace the importance of providing citizens with open access to technology, the role of new technologies in driving innovation, and the many benefits of increasing its capacity. Technology and innovation cannot be standalone principles, but must be support, advance the previous three principles, and that's very important to understand as well. We're going to hear, in the case of Uruguay, in the case of the government of Uruguay, in this webinar from the standpoint of a government agency whose primary goal when created was to advance e-government. And its tasks now in that process of inception of open government with open government as well. So most likely we're going to get some insight about this in that regard. The other part has to be the SMART framework, right? Assisting participating governments in seeking effective, clear, and measurable commitments: specific, measurable, answerable, relevant, and time-bound. Nothing different from things that we know also in this regard. Format and length, I'm just going to leave pass really quick this. Each action plan takes its own format and length, but it has a structure that I'm not showing here in this webinar that I invite you to visit in the toolkit or the handbook. But there's certain format and standard. But what I'm saying is they're all going to look different. There might be similar commitments, but the length will be different, and it has to respond to the specific needs, reality, and dialogues that are given in the country. But the additional considerations when determining commitment formats and length are those ones that you see on the screen: clarity, holistic, time-bound, and extension requirements. Clarity means action plans should be clear, succinct, and action-oriented. If you see at the commitments, they're statements. They're short. And so that's part of what we're going to be working on later to know actually how to draft them as well. We're going to have more discussions about it, training and so on, and we're going to be discussing about this in the actual on-site dialogues and workshops that we're going to have. Holistic, meaning governments are encouraged to apply a whole of e-government approach to the development of implementation of their commitments. That's very important as well. In a sense, just try to create a culture of being acting and seeing a government like a compact, a body, instead of seeing silos. Then time-bound, all action plans should cover a 2-year period. This is for OGP standard, with implementation period ending on August 31st of the second year. At minimum, each commitment should have yearly milestones so that government, civil society organizations, and the IRM, which is the independent review mechanism, have a common set of time-bound metrics to assess progress. So this is the time-bound according to OGP standard. And extension requirements, commitments that will take longer than 2 years to implement are allowed as long as they are clearly cited and the country's next action plan and include a 2-year intermediate milestone. So it is possible to look at long-term commitments. Probably they're not so recommended unless things are in place to make sure that they could be achieved. Well, I'll leave the two links again on this presentation we're going to be shared with you. But as right now, I want to give time to Virginia Pardo to take on her presentation. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'm going to introduce Virginia real quick because it's important for us in this process as well. Virginia, as I said, is the Director of Digital Citizenship of AGESIC. AGESIC, again, being the Uruguayan Government and Information and Knowledge Society National Agency, and she oversees the agency's open government and open data portfolio. We have worked with Virginia throughout the years in promoting this issue. She's a system engineer, graduated from Universidad de la República Oriental del Uruguay. Currently, as I said, is the director of digital citizenship, and she's responsible for carrying out projects related to unified portal, government open data, citizen e-participation, and e-government regulatory reform since 2010. So she's got quite a first-hand experience on this. She's council member of the Public Information Access Unit and the Personal Data Control and Regulatory Unit as well, again from 2010. Among others, she's responsible to articulate and promote the open government in Uruguay. Therefore, she is the local representative, the point of contact to the Open Government Partnership as well, and it's great to have first-hand experience in this process. She's been the OGP point of contact since 2011. In that process, and that's what is very important also, she's been in charge of the construction of the 4 national action plans of Uruguay. So we couldn't ask for a better experienced person to tell us about how to develop action plans. She's got an extensive experience in project management, significantly in the area of e-government, IT information and telecommunications, and has also been a software development project manager for implementation and improvement of access and standards at the National Telecommunications Administration, as well as teaching on project management and IT service and management. So that's her background. Virginia, from this point on, you can unmute your mic and continue while I load your presentation.
La cámara también me dijo. No, te presento también. Okay, well, thank you very much, Mike and Oas, for the opportunity to share the Uruguayan experience in the open government. I'm here, I'm physically with Daniel, too, with me, the civil society representative. So it's an example of the good relationship with the government of the civil society here in Uruguay. And well, my idea is to share a very general vision about our process, because it's in 20 minutes is so difficult to resume all of the work that we are doing in this all of the years. And well, I try to share the experience, the best practice, and our lesson learned, especially in Uruguay, because we have a very long process in Uruguay, and a very long and progressive and evolutive process. Okay. Excuse me, sorry for my English, it's not the best, I know. So we have problem with the interpretation or something like that. I want to use the help of Daniel or ask me to repeat, okay? Thank you very much. Okay, I think that the first step that we like to share is Uruguay is starting in the Open Government Partnership in 2011 as the second group of to introduce us in the OGP. So we have a lot of years in this process. and in particular me and Daniel too, we start in the beginning. We are in the first steps so we know all of the process and the evolution. And we have two key aspects that I think is important to result in the process governance. First, if we create a group, we assign the responsibility for the open government initiative in AGESIC. We create a group of management, a responsibility for the implementation, and we have a structure and budget to implement the open government plan and open government initiatives. It's not only the plan that we are working. So we have a group, functional group in a division in AGESIC that work dedicated to improve and promote the open government in Uruguay. This is one of a first step. It's not a little detail. We have a institutionalization and a continuing operation in AGESIC. And the second key aspect is the working group. For the beginning, we create an open group working with government, civil society, and academy, and we work together to define all of the process. And we define the different steps and the priorities and the criteria that we are going to build the different action plans. I think these two things are great in our process. What we said before, we have an incremental process. Now we are in our fourth action plan, and we have the first, the second, and the third. And every process, every construction of plans have different aspects and different objectives to join. The first action plan was the more simple and more little because was our objective to join to OGP. So it was a very simple process, and we don't have any participation, maybe. The second plan, we improve the dialogue process, especially we have more commitment, more public organization, and more civil society organizations in working with the construction. And the third, we add more institutions, and we think with an open states view, not only the executive administration. And our fourth plan, in my opinion, was the best because we have all dialogue process, more institution, and a right approach. We join the commitment with different areas in the public politics. We select the priorities of the government and for the citizens, and we put the gender, the access information right, and all of those things in the same view to construct the commitment. So we are growing especially in institutions and civil civil organizations in charge and involved, and a very good co-creation process, I think is the best. Our co-creation process have, in a very, very general vision, 4 steps. One, we start all of the cycles plan, we start with a kickoff, like a formal launch for the process with the authorities, the new directors, the new authorities or representatives in the different government institutions. You know that we change, no? We have change in every 4 years or 5 years because we have changing of authorities, the government. So we need every time change have inductions. We must do an induction for all of the actors about doing talks, workshop, course, training, all of this. We start the process every 2 years. We start with these actions, and in parallel we start a process for the e-participation platform, and we have a lot of dialogue tables. This is the most important and the most bigger stage of phase of our process. I'm going to do a zoom in the next diapo about the participatory process. The second stage is the prioritization. So the working group that analyze the proposals, do a systematization, a classification, and a feasibility analysis. So we decide what are really the more relevant commitment, or maybe proposal. We don't talk about commitment now yet. So we do a co-creation workshops, create commitment drafts, and maybe publish the responses to each proposal. So we have maybe a filter to do the more relevant and more significant commitment, and the commitment that are demanded for the civil society and for the citizen, of course. The first stage or phase is the public consultation. You know that in the OGP we have a requirement and a standard that all of the commitment they will be put in public consultation, and maybe we are very useful because you can show the consultation outside the little circle that we are working in the dialogue table, the presential discussion. So maybe we have more opinion and more analysis for another people that they can stay in the first steps. We do a publication of all of the response for each proposal, and we do an evaluation for the participation process. So all of this information is published in our website, and is especially doing a processing, a systematization to be more transparent as possible. And the fourth stage is approved and the publication of this commitment. We create with the working group a final document that maybe is valid for all of the institutions that they were involved. Of course, when we put a commitment in the action plan, the institution organization, they must have the approval for the authority to have the commitment and the budget to improve to execute the commitment. And we have in each action plan, we have the executive branch degree. We have a degree for the president to enforce the monitoring for the action plan. And we put all of the commitment in an online platform to do the diffusion, transparency, and monitoring during the 2 years for the execution plan. What is our dialogue process? Okay, I think in Uruguay you have 3 spaces for dialogue. The working group, I think, is the best and the first mechanisms to the discussion, because we have a very good representative for all of the different actors. Thank you, Daniel. And we have the civil society with a very good representation. I want to send after Daniel to explain about this, how we work. But we have a very good process. We have meetings every year, working for the construction for the plan, and not only for the working plan, for sensibilization, for course, for training, for a lot of things. It's not only the objective for the group builds the working plan, the action plan, but it's a very good space for discussion and for define the process and the priorities. The second space that we have in Uruguay is the platform for dialogue and for the creation, like workshops, like presential meetings, bilateral meetings with the organizations and the civil society with these issues. So we have a lot of working rooms, table discussions, and events, something like that. And we have a virtual space for the public consultation and for the proposal. So we work with the three space dialogues, work together and in all of the time in the life of the open government process. And we have especially some features that we research about that. It's important that we have the consensus for all of the proposals. This is a premise. Yes, that we work in the working group. Yes, so we need to have we work for the consensus. It's especially our objective. We have total transparency for the proposal and for the discussions. We have a website, and we put all of the discussion in the sessions, in the round tables, we have a register for all of in the platform, the answers. All of the reports are published. So we have the principle for transparency. And we have an evaluation for all of the process every time. We have a permanent evaluation of our process for all of the participants. And each authority support the space of dialogue. For example, we have a roundtable about environment where we invite and we are sponsored by the authorities of environment in Uruguay. So we need the high level for the sponsor the activity. Okay, this is some premise too. What are our challenges? Because we have, of course, a lot of things to improve. More decentralization. So we have, we think that a lot of roundtables and discussion are in Montevideo, and we must go to the outside, go to the interior of the Uruguay for the another part of Uruguay, not only in the capital. We need more co-created commitment. We have a lot of in our for action plan. We have a lot of co-created commitment, but not all are 100% co-created. And we need more participation for civil society beyond the open government circle. Okay, we have, Daniela, I'm going to share with you the growing of the network of civil society, but we need more actors. It's our opinion for the government. And maybe we need to enforce more national agenda synergy. So we must include more commitments related for the priority for the national agenda for another priorities in the government to do more synergy. So we must include the concept and the culture for open government in another project for the government. This is the idea. We have different types of commitment. In Uruguay, we have examples. I want to don't spend time in this. We have a link here that you can go to all of our action plans. The more relevant for us is the access information commitment, the citizen participation. We have a lot of commitment about transparency, anti-corruption, and maybe we have a very nice and interesting commitment about public innovation and collaboration. We have, for example, the at your service, and a lot of examples that we share experience, that we share working with government and the civil society organizations. We have, this is important for our process, when we start each action plan circle, we define we define as a list of criterios or priorities or requirements that we must have to use to build the action plan. We have general criteria about the selection, what commitment include or not in the plan, about the formulation, what are work constructing the commitment, and about the implementation. For instance, about general criteria, of course, all of the commitment, they must contribute to OGP values. They must be a smart commitment. They must be measurable. Have a lot of things that you must do a very monitoring process. We have the commitment, they must be co-created in the most of the cases. They must have a citizen participation process. They must impact in local communities. This is a list of, we must promote that the commitment can permit this type of criteria. For example, they must be a product of co-creation process, or maybe a proposal for a lot of participants that maybe is a good idea to incorporate in the action plan. And there must be a consensus in the working group, okay? And another thing is important that all of the commitment, they might be integrated in an online platform that to monitoring, and they have a publicity for the commitment. All of the commitment, they must be published in a website, and there are more transparency for all of the citizens in Uruguay and for the international community, of course. Okay, it's a lot of rules that they must have. It's a must to be into our action plan. And finally, I have a lot of support tools. We have a lot of tools that maybe help for AGESIC and the working group to to the creation process, for the diffusion, for the publication, for the access information about we have a lot of tools. We have a website. We have access information for all of the information about the process, the meeting groups, the DAILs. All of the information is available in the web. And we have a process management tool. We have a platform for public consultation that is the same each time, and we use to promote the transparency and the public consultation. And we have when we have the plan, we have a tool that we call Mirador de Gobierno Abierto. It's like it's a platform online that all of the commitments are published, and we have the percent of advance and execution. It's online. And we have all of the information in open data. So we have advanced visualization panel. So every people can have online the status of our plan. And finally, I think it's like a very, very, very high view. In my opinion, we need for a sustainability a good baseline. So we need maybe this diapo can be put in the first or in the top. It's the same, but I think 4 things that we need to continue the initiative, to have a solid support for doing this type of process. We have more than 6 years, 8 years, a continuous 8-year process. That for that we need a governance, a good articulation, and acts and degrees to support this. It's impossible to do a process, a continuing process without the legislation. So we have a very good legislation for the access information, for open data. We have the working group institutionalized for degree. So we need this. We have a permanent process of monitoring and management. A consensus co-creation process is relevant, and a lot of digital tools for the transparency, for the accountability, for access, the open government for everybody. We have especially a capacity generation. We have in the working group, we work every time for generate a very good network, for different areas for the organization, access information, open data, citizen participation, principles of open government. Training for the civil servant and civil society is especially important and relevant for us. And we spend a lot of time in these issues. And the international representatives, okay? It's important for us and for the institution here and for the country to have a very good representation for Uruguay in the international space, to show experience like that, or maybe you learn for another experience. Okay, if for Uruguay we learn about another experience in the rest of the world, and we are introduce this best practice in our process. So I think these 4 concepts for me is key and important for a very good process in Uruguay. Okay, and this is it's a very, very high level resume. I want to share with Daniel to improve my English and my concept, and talk more about civil society. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Virginia, for this great presentation. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of insight on the presentation, and it's good to see the picture of what happened in Uruguay. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Daniel Carranza. Daniel is the co-founder of Data Uruguay, Data UI, a civil society organization that creates tools and advocates for open data and open government locally and regionally through initiatives such as Abre Latam. Data UI is also a member of the Open Government Network of Uruguay, a coalition of Uruguayan civil society organizations advocating for open government, and this organization acts as the civil society coalition to the open government partnership processes in Uruguay. Daniel is a consultant as well in digital tools and media for multilaterals, government, civil society, and businesses. Mr. Carranza specializes in open government and e-government and is an open government fellow of our dear organization from American States right here in DC. So, Daniel, thank you for bringing your perspective of what's happening, how has open government advanced in Uruguay from the perspective of the civil society and from the perspective of the member organization to the Red de Gobierno Abierto de Uruguay. Go ahead, Daniel. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. So in a way, I will talk about the same topics, but from a viewpoint of civil society, or maybe trying to transmit why we think those things are important from the view of civil society, especially if my understanding is not wrong, because you're building over there in Belize this whole program, and probably there are a lot of steps that you can actually save if you already know, or at least know our side of how we got it done and what we believe is really valuable in these processes. So the first question is, why do we need civil society in OGP beyond the obvious, right? Our participation in this sort of projects was, from the viewpoint of my organization, of Data Uruguay, was very obvious because we work around transparency and open data and stuff like that, so it was very directly related. But beyond that, it was also a very important place to have incidence in what goes on in government. I think that's like the key issue for why you need an open government is that, once again, from the view of civil society, it gives you power, if you will, but this is not the sort of unchecked power or anything like that. It's just that you can access the people who are taking decisions, and at least I start from a vision where I believe that most decisions that are taken, most wrong decisions come from lack of information or lack of dialogue and stuff like that, and not necessarily because you have bad will or anything like it. Something also very important that needs to be taken into account when you design these sort of processes, and was definitely very important for how this all worked out in Uruguay, has to do with the culture, both in civil society or in the population in general, and institutional culture. We are working in a country that has a long history of participation, where most people in positions of power are relatively accessible, and actually a very significant portion of the population is already involved in different activities around participation or incidents or stuff like that, or collectives, cooperatives, stuff like that. So we already have not only a good basis, but a lot of the concepts and principles and stuff like that are already within the building structure of society itself. So how it happened in our case, Virginia was thinking about how the different plans went on. The first plan, as with every country, is usually just pick and choose of whatever you're already doing, and that just helps the countries get into OGP and start moving the whole thing. But our second plan, I think, was the key moment when the process had some advances, but maybe not as much as we wanted. And I think it's very important that this, actually, the Open Government Network, the Red de Gobierno Abierto, and eventually the working group around open government with all actors from government and academy, private sector, etc., started from a demand for that to exist. And I think that has basically gave us the profile or the perspective of the whole thing from that point on. We try as much as we can to answer to demand. We don't believe that we know what is needed. We don't believe that we know the way we should go. We try to find demand on different issues and respond to that through the open government tools. And that's how we got also to give such a significance to co-creation. Actually, if I'm not wrong, I believe we started working on co-creation very heavily before it was like, fashionable within OGP or stuff like that. And it mostly has to do with the results that we achieved through that co-creation. Beyond the recommendations, beyond that kind of stuff, we were lucky enough to see very good incidents or very good impact of these sort of projects from very early on in the OGP process in Uruguay. And also this has helped with some sort of organic growth of the whole thing. And here I need to clarify, we have like this contradictory thing where the process is very recognized, is highly participative. It has, I believe, at least a very significant impact. But at the same time, we are very aware, and also Virginia said this, that we are not covering as nearly as enough issues or places, like geographically, or topics as we would like. So that tension is also something that pushes us to grow as much as we can. But what I was going to say had to do with the way we have grown, still with that challenges ahead, has been very organic. We were able to incorporate some topics where the perspective or demands of civil society were needed within the process for the action plans. And also we were able to get demands that come from civil society or just people that access through the online platform or whatever to the right authorities. And those links usually mean that new organizations, both on government or civil society side, end up involving themselves with the project, with the process. And that's actually a very nice and organic way to grow. Not maybe the most effective, obviously, if you can just give an order and force everybody to be within the plan, that's very practical. And of course, we would love to do that, but we are also very aware that those sort of things get bodies into a place, but not necessarily get the willingness and the political cooperation to have like a good, strong, and ambitious commitments. Okay, so this brought us to where we are today. That is the design or co-design actually of the 5th action plan. I think the first thing I usually highlight about our current process is how it has always been a very collaborative and friendly relationship among all parts. That is very important, and that's not necessarily how it usually works. Different countries have different ways to relate within civil society and government, but I think even in cases where you have very large differences, and we've had those, you can still have a very friendly process, and usually personal relationships end up forming around those and really help out the process to grow strong and to have confidence and honesty among all parts. This has also led us to a very developed set of principles and criteria. Also, Virginia spoke about that a lot. We have good documentation that we can make available to you if that's of your interest, relating to all the standards that we try to follow. It's very interesting to see how those evolve through the 5 action plans that have been designed. And you can see how the focus shifts slightly. Like we never do like a strong pivot at any point. We've always been very happy with our results, but this is like a ladder where you take one step, and then once you have that like solid stance, you can go to the next one and stuff like that. At this point, we are basically putting our focus in ambition. We believe that open government works. I mean, that's like that hypothesis has been proven through the first, I wouldn't even say 4. I think the first 3 plans have already clearly proven that. But now we really want to take this to a level where we can talk about like significant, very significant public impact. And this has also a lot to do with going for this idea of open state, not only open government, but I believe in two complementary but different senses. On the one hand, of course, we want to have commitments from every branch in government. That's pretty obvious in a sense, although I'm saying it's easy. But on the other hand, we are really trying to get the concept of open government to be internalized within different areas of government and within government practices. Those are the real institutional, if you want, impacts that make a big change. Open government plans are awesome. They are a great tool. I'm personally very thankful for them and very happy about many of the things we've achieved through those plans. But if we are being truly ambitious for the future, what we need to do is for the concept of open government to be internalized by every government agency, by every practice, by every project and stuff like that, because you can never fit a whole government working as an open government within a plan. The plan has to show what's the next big objective, what's the way, it has to lead the way, but we can't be happy with just complying with the plans. We have to go much, much, much further than that. And I believe the way that actually happens is by proving people in all parts, like all stakeholders around open government, not only government agencies and political leaders, that the incentives to join this idea of open government exist. When you are able to show through the plans, through some specific commitments that are very successful, that those kind of ideas work, and we've seen this, what happens is that you no longer have to go out and convince people to do this, either because it's like the right thing to do or because it's cool or whatever, but people start coming to you asking, like, teach me about this because I saw you got this and that result, and we want to have the same. And I think that's one of the biggest evidence, like one of the clearest evidence of how the whole open government initiative has been successful. We see that sort of behavior in different actors, people or organizations that come to us and want to either join the process, which is very useful for us and interesting, or actually apply these principles in other areas. And I won't say that we made it yet, but I think we are, in that sense, on a very good track to get the idea to a point that it's something that happens as default. And who knows, maybe one day we don't need open government plans because open government is already going through across the state as a whole. Actually, that I went a little bit fast, maybe, but that's like the main ideas behind them. I don't know if you're okay, Mike, but maybe we can go to the questions where usually the most interesting stuff comes out.
Thank you, Daniel, very much for your insight from the civil society side and from the coalition of civil society organizations side there in Uruguay. So I had a question that I posted for Virginia, and Christine also posted another one on the chat. I'm going to read them, and then I'm going to add one for you, Daniel. So, and please, for all participants, do send your questions right now on the chat. That will be great. Or give it to Audrey or Melanie there in Belize right now on the other side, so they can refer to the speakers. So my first question is for Virginia. I asked, could you give some example of one or two commitments that you really like the most in any plan, first, second, third, fourth, and why, and how they were co-created? That would be great. Probably give us some insight. And then Christine asked about what would be a recommendation for a country that is just starting to develop the first action plan. And probably this could be for both of you from the perspective of civil society and from the perspective of government. And then I have another question for Daniel. Daniel, how did you come up with this idea of a coalition of civil society organizations called de la Red de Gobierno Abierto in Uruguay? And how has it worked in the process? Why is it important, that network, for the open government in Belize? Go ahead.
Okay. Actually, Virginia was already looking for a couple of examples. I think we have two great ones. Okay. So one of them is the Observatory on Gender-Based Violence Against Women, which is a commitment that, first of all, it came from a lot of demand, and it's also very important to say that this demand was both from civil society and within government. So talking about the incentives that we were mentioning earlier, a lot of different actors, including it's not multilateral, like an international organization, ILDA in this case, aligned with this. So you ended up having Ministry of the Interior, Office of Planning and Budget, AGESIC, ILDA, civil society in Uruguay, like Cotidiano Mujer, Open Government Network, and I'm missing anybody else? Oh yeah, the National Institute for Women, and the Uruguayan Network Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. So a bunch of actors from different areas sharing their incentives and actually sharing the same sort of problems. Like, we came from a place where people were not blaming each other, but like everybody took different measurements of domestic and gender violence on different standards and criteria, and they all said that everybody else's was the wrong one, but nobody really spoke about how they could fix it. And this project was a huge achievement in that sense, I believe. And it was not only co-created on the letter of the written word of the commitment, but the whole process involved a lot of collaboration, and I think the result is also amazing. And the other one, I think, is also very interesting on how it ended up being co-created by government, actually an independent body within government, and civil society, was the complaint reception and processing system for the Transparency and Public Ethics Board. So the reception of complaints, on corruption and stuff like that, is something that is always on the table around the issues of transparency and obviously anti-corruption. And here we not only had a demand from diverse actors on having a good system to get these complaints and record them and stuff like that and have transparency around them, but also we had a huge need from the Transparency and Public Ethics Board to get support to make it happen, because they didn't have the resources to do it. So we ended up, once again, with a collaboration on different areas, where the design of the project, of the platform actually, was helped by multilateral organizations, so the Social, if I remember correctly. The whole, like, a usability consultancy or whatever was done by civil society, helping the board, and the actual development of the tool was done here in AGESIC. So once again, not only co-creation on what we wrote and agreed on, but actually co-creation on getting it done. Okay, so the other question.
I think that I think this is important. That the last thing that Daniel said, that we are especially dedicated to when we build the commitment. We be sure that the co-creation is in the first step and during all of the implementation process. It's also, we are very preoccupied, or especially here, in that the commitment is not only when we put in the action plan. we have the implementation, we have the execution, the monitoring, and maybe we have input or maybe instant space of participation during the implementation too. So our commitment, if we are looking, we have a lot of working group in the commitment or space for participation during the implementation or during the execution of the different commitments. And maybe in some cases more important this space than the first in a paper. You know, we need to have the civil organizations during the execution to validate, to prove, to test, to be sure that the implementation is according for the first objective. Okay, so we work together all of the process, not only in the construction of the commitment. We force the work together during the execution too. Okay.
And so for the second question, actually the question from Christine, I think I will link it to Paco's question on the first action plan, right? How you get this for a first time involvement in this sort of thing. I'm not saying this is necessarily easy, but I believe that most of the big missteps that you can have on a first action plan have already been done by others. So there's a lot to avoid. There's a lot of knowledge in many action plans. And I think you can see that in the sort of documents that evaluate those plans, but you can also see them just comparing a first plan to a second plan, or a first plan to the latest plan. I think that the one general lesson that I've learned, at least, is that you can't save the important steps of the project. If you want to save time, if you want to skip a few steps because you don't really get why they're useful, you're probably missing out. There's a reason why the most advanced plans in this space usually share characteristics such as a lot of co-creation processes, a lot of consultation, a lot of face-to-face meeting, as much coverage of territory and different sorts of people and diversity as possible. Those are the things that really make the difference between an okay plan and a great plan. I think that's like the short version of the answer. Then we could have to get like into specifics. And then for Mike's questions earlier for me, that has a lot to do on why we had to create the Open Government Network. The honest answer is that it probably began as a way to answer to a bureaucratic need. And I don't speak about bureaucracy in any way as a despective sort of word or anything like that. Representation is something that is very discussed within civil society. Our view on that is that we don't represent civil society as a whole, because we couldn't possibly do that. We represent the organizations that are within the network. And that discussion on how we would participate in something that is institutionalized, that is a working group, led us to the need to have this network to actually present ourselves as something relatively formal. And I think it has been very successful in that, but it also has a bunch of challenges. It's really hard for civil society organizations that specify on one or two subjects at most to dedicate time and effort, and this links to the latest question over there by Melanie, to supervise a process that is very demanding. It has been ongoing for the last 8 years, and nobody has funding for this in civil society. So that's one of the biggest challenges. The truth is that we have made this work with a mixture of goodwill, because we are very interested in this happening, and trying to be as efficient as possible. The Open Government Network rules itself by consensus, but also tacit approval. like if we need to speak about something and we are meeting and you can't go or whatever, or you don't send somebody else or whatever, then you lose your spot. If nobody says no to something specifically, then you tacitly approve. We need that sort of agility because we don't have the luxury of time and money to dedicate to this. This is something that we cultivate because it helps either directly or indirectly to advance all the other topics that we all work on. But it's not a central preoccupation or occupation for most organizations in the network. Maybe us and Cainfo are the exception, but that's something that I don't think it's necessarily bad, but it needs to be very clear from the beginning. And related to funding, I believe that the funding that we've earned, both in government and in civil society, we actually earned. AGESIC has been able to put together more funding because AGESIC was able to show results to the government and internationally and etc. From civil society, the times that we've been able to get funding, we've also got that because we were able to show a lot of results before getting the funding. So in that sense, what has come that has been very little has been through a lot of work, basically.
Thank you, Daniel. I have something to say about different things there. Does Regina want to add something to it before I go, before I speak?
Okay.
No.
So I have a few things to say about this, all the topics, and I think it is important. I want to thank, of course, Daniel and Virginia. They bring that experience firsthand and overall accompaniment of the entire process from inception in Uruguay, right? 4 plans, very valuable, I should say. It is highly valuable. That know-how is spectacular. Now, I want to say a few things. The advantage of a country such as Belize right now is that it doesn't have to go through the learning process that Uruguay or others went through for the first plan, right? I remember very well talking to governments and civil society at the margins of the 2013 Global Open Government Partnership Summit in London. And there was a confusion in general about how to go about doing open government and action plans. It was too new, of course. Back then, there's been a really quick learning process for governments and civil society, and that's shown in these new action plans and entire processes. So that to highlight that our effort with the project is to make sure that we can learn for Belize out of all those learning experiences, lessons learned from other cases such as Uruguay, right? Do something that Daniel highlighted well, Virginia as well. Do as much consulting, co-creation, multi-actor forums as possible, and that is very important. And that's something that this project will pursue throughout the year. And so that's very important. Hopefully, that does, well, no, let me go back. That doesn't mean necessarily that we won't encounter obstacles that were faced by governments like Uruguay in the beginning, right? We're still going to face those co-creation challenges, but most likely there will be answers and experiences out there that we can tackle on to learn about how to overcome those ones. So the other thing important, the open government action plan shouldn't be an aspirational document. That I said in the beginning, I reiterate it right now, and I think that's tied also with the funding of financing questions as well. I mean, there's a lot of priorities, but most likely not all of them going to make a part of a plan The agreements out of the consultations, the dialogues will help us, will help Belize to funnel and trickle down what would be those necessary priorities that are also tied with those characteristics that I explained in the beginning, including time bound. And that means that within Belize, there has to be a discussion of if there are funds for the execution of those commitments, or if they can become accessible. Now, just because what we're living in right now, from the Trust of the Americas perspective and the OES perspective, we've been granted support to pursue this project by the Embassy of the United States in Belmopan. That is current. We don't know what the plan of the embassy is for the future, but I want to say that once, and I said it yesterday in another meeting that we have with the executive committee of the Open Government of Belize, is that once the government or the country makes a decision to formally join or formalize its Open Government Initiative, ACA, through the Open Government Partnership, there will be mechanisms of support for the country. And so the decision will enable financial support. We don't know how much necessarily. The plan is a good exercise because Belize will be able to tell with a plan all they wanted to do, and most likely all those commitments, or at least in the process, will have the commitments will have a tag price, give or take. So that's important. We have to make sure that we can enable international cooperation in the case of countries that are not classified as high income or medium income countries, right? The case of Uruguay or others. That's important. The other thing that's very important, and Virginia highlights something very important. There is a decree, or there was a decree. Basically, it was a policy directed for the implementation of open government, and so that's also very important because it makes the government institutions think about incorporating that into the life of their management, and therefore make provisions within the budget. It's not extending budget. I should say that a lot of what government institutions have done throughout since 2011 is reassign budgets, right? Being very creative as well, and as to what you're going to be implementing, what will be the priorities, and you have to reassign. That doesn't mean that money cannot flow to specific open government commitments. There is the there is also the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. A lot of the countries have funds to fulfill those commitments, and in a lot of commitments are tied to fulfilling Sustainable Development Goals, for example. So there is a way to make connections of funding in the country, but it will not be easy anyhow. And we cannot also guarantee that a specific commitment, a decision will channel X amount of dollars for this. The other part of that is civil society. Yes, in the case of Danielle highlighted very well, they have to be very creative, participative in their processes and their funds that are granted. And as Danielle said it, because I see it I saw that in Uruguay, but in many other countries in the region, is earned money, definitely so. And that's actually good in a sense, because we know definitely that it's got traction, open government's got traction, and their results out of it. But there are limited resources all the time. So hopefully there will be more international cooperation also arriving into Belize for supporting this kind of cooperations on open government and so on and so forth. Very important, maybe the Belizean ecosystem can think about how to make sure that Belize takes proper or formal steps that could enable funding new policies to strengthen that open government thing. I will leave it there, and just because of time, unless there's another question. I'm sorry, I cannot hear, I cannot listen, I cannot see the chat right now. There are no more questions. Let me see. No, there are no more questions there. So I want to say thank you to Daniel and Virginia. Unless you have something else to add, we're probably gonna be finishing the webinar soon, because I know you also have another meeting going on right now in AGESIC in Montevideo that you have to attend, and also for the time.
No, just thanking, and if you need anything else, don't hesitate to contact us.
No, I think that is that the same that in Uruguay we have to do. It's very important to show the very good experience and good practice in the world. And the best action plan for Belize is the action plan that needs the people of Belize. So we don't forget the context and the needs for the country.
Virginia, we can.
There are a lot of examples in the world, but
so,
the best action plan in Belize is the Belize people need. So don't remember that.
The Belizean people. So thank you very much for that note. I believe there is no more questions in Belize right now by Audrey. I also want to thank all the participants there at the venue, and also those ones connected online. Again, this session is being recorded and it will be distributed to you along with all the presentations and links that have been shared on the chat. So we'll see you next week. Just be mindful for participants. We have our last webinar next week. We're going to talk more about co-creation and setting ambitious commitments. It's on Thursday as well, same time. We have OGP, and we're going to have Estonia also speaking about their experience on co-creation and setting ambitious commitments. So do not miss that one. And again, as a result of this series of webinars, there is one important request that we are reiterating to you, participants. Do think, reflect, and send us ideas of those priorities that you think should be reflected on a first Open Government Action Plan in Belize. Do send us what you think is a draft commitment, and is the outcome of this training, because we're going to talk about those drafts and proposals that you are making in these training sessions during next month's dialogue tables in Belize. So make sure you do that. Write, get inspired and write a few commitments. They will not be final. It's part of the process that we're starting, but they're ideas. We want to make sure that we have ideas to begin that dialogue. We're going to bring more and have different methodologies set up next month in Belize to start co-creating an action plan. I leave it there, and I want to thank you all for the participation on site, and all the partners who have also made this possible, the Trust for the Americas and the Embassy of the United States in Belize right now.